Abraham.
Well, speaking of Abraham, you all got a prompt now.
Yep.
He's tired of the football talk. It's time to move on to.
Yeah. Come on. Game on. 7:33.
That's right. No, we can keep talking about football. I just figured I hit the record button. It's might as well.
So that YouTube can talk about football with us.
That's right. That's right.
Looks at the comments on the video.
I don't know though. Talking about games, I think you got to up your game and your punmanship, Pastor.
Hey, YouTube, Theron here. Today we were talking about we're not going to die until the Lions make it to the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was only talking about the next 50 years, Theron.
I got to think about the puns. That's
Maybe
not
you
something
like
that flows off the
Maybe.
fingertips as much.
If I get to triple digits, it might happen. It's a possibility.
Honestly, based on.
Un poquito. Okay. Well, go ahead, Sylvia.
I had a question from the reading
Yes.
today. Something stood out to me in Genesis.
Yes.
Where it says they're talking about, creating Eve.
Yep.
And then it sort of seems like out of the blue, they're talking about a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. So none of that, this is the first we're hearing in creating Eve. Where does the mother and father and that whole dynamic, there hasn't been any procreation yet. There hasn't been anything yet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is an editorial comment by the Spirit. All right, so this is the Spirit working through Moses to say, and this is where marriage came from, which is why we have the traditions we have, because Genesis doesn't get written down until Moses writes it. So we're talking Exodus is 1446 BC. Abraham is about 210 BC, so 700 years after Abraham. Probably about 2,000 years or so, well, not 2,000 years. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's more than a millennium from Adam to Abraham, and so it's close to a millennium. So we got 1,000 years there where marriage has happened, and then 2,000 when we get to the children of Israel. So this is just Moses really cementing for people the understanding that marriage is not just a social construct that we created one day. It's baked in, and here's where it happened.
I was gonna say, 'cause it just seemed like it was why right there?
Yeah. Probably because it's the first time that we get male and female named. We get male and female in Genesis 1. He created them male and female in the image of God. He created them. But this is the first time where they both have names, where they both have they're kind of, we'll say, real people at that point. And they are going to procreate and do all the kind of normal marriage stuff. So this is kind of the first opportunity in the scripture for us to say, there's marriage, and that's what we're doing. So good question, though. It's a comment that many have looked at, have wondered if maybe it was a later editorial comment added. I think it was an editorial comment, but I think it was added initially to the story when Moses sees the story, and then the Spirit says, and now make sure people understand this is what's going on.
Okay.
And then you get all the in the modern commentaries, you get all this wonderfully silly nonsense about nakedness and nudity and all sorts of junk. So you'll notice I left out verse 25 out of today's reading because I didn't want to deal with this at all. I don't want anybody there dealing with this. Go ahead, Linda.
I was reading a recent Lutheran Witness, and I can't remember exactly when it is because they sometimes pile up before I get a chance to read them. But it's all about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because I just read the article that talked about that line in Genesis coming into play in the New Testament when he's talking about sexual immorality with the Gentiles. And the whole article tied it all together, kind of like today's, service did. It was really interesting because I just read the article like 2 days prior, but it tied all of that together, where he was talking about to the Gentiles about marriage and then pulled it from the Old Testament. It was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, because outside of that theological construct of men and women being built for each other, and therefore offering this kind of spiritual level to it, it becomes just a physicality, a practicality of, hey, this is good for us, let's do it for a while. And if you don't have that underpinning, it falls apart. So yeah, we had to teach the Gentiles when they came in. We still have to teach the Gentiles when they come in.
Mhm.
This is one of the reasons that sometimes I will offer pre-marriage counseling and even towards conducting marriages for those who are currently outside of the church, especially if they have not a lot of background on the faith, to bring them in, to give them that theological basis. Otherwise, they'll never know. Okay, good questions. Since we're on just questions, Jeff had asked me this morning about the Moravian Church. That's the correct church, right, Jeff?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, because that's the one I looked up. So if it was the wrong church, I'm done. So the Moravian Church is a very old church. They actually would, I took a look around because I know a little bit about them, but wanted to get a little more background. They consider themselves to be the oldest Protestant church in the world. And they base themselves off of a reformer by the name of John Huss. Now, John Huss lived about 100 years before Martin Luther did. He lived south of Germany, kind of the Austria-Hungary area. And John was burned at the stake for being a heretic. Now, there is a lot of connection between the Lutheran Church and the Moravian Church. The Moravian Church holds the articles of the Augsburg Confession, the first 21 of them, as a confessional document. They think Martin Luther's Small Catechism is a good thing, and they hold that as a confessional document. Now, at this point, they become a little bit of a mixed bag because they also hold like the articles of the English Church, the Barmen Confession from 1939 of the German churches, confessing churches against Adolf Hitler as a confessional document. And they have a whole lot of other kind of eclectic groups. They are a very, we'll say, eclectic church. They have some doctrines that they hold to that we would say are well and good. And then they just kind of, once you get outside of that center circle, they get a little fuzzy, and they allow a whole lot of different things. Their confession in terms of the Lord's Supper, nearly identical to the Lutheran churches, with the key exception that in their liturgy, it formally states that this is what our church believes, but if you believe something different, that's okay. You can still have communion. So that should give you kind of an idea of really what they are. The connection, though, between John Huss and Luther is fascinating. So Huss I think it's Hungarian. I have it up on my phone here because I wanted to get it right. John Huss, as he's being burned alive, offers a prophecy about Martin Luther, who will come in about 100 years after John's death. Bohemian, that's what he's speaking. He's speaking in Bohemian, which is kind of a southern German, southern Germany. So in Bohemian, Huss means goose, right? Like the chick, the thing you eat at Christmas, goose. All right. He says this: "Now we will cook the goose." He says this to the official executioner, who says yes. And then he said, "But there will come an eagle in 100 years that you will not reach." And he's saying this to the Catholic executioner who burns him at the stake. But literally 100 years after John Huss is burned at the stake, Martin Luther is born in Eisenach, Germany, and will become the reformer of which the Catholic Church cannot reach. Luther will look at some of the writings of John Huss as he kind of falls into this reforming time frame, this activity. And he will actually make a remark that says, if only I had known, these writings earlier, we would all be Hussites. So he agrees with John Huss on a number of things, but there are a number of things that they don't agree on as well. So he kind of says that tongue in cheek. But so that's kind of the connection. There's the Moravian Church in America is it was first founded in Atlanta, and then it has a base in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That's kind of the northern base right now. And there's a number of these little churches all throughout the northern kind of Wisconsin, Minnesota area. So it's an interesting little church. They believe in missions very, very strongly. And they believe in hard work and ethics. So, which is, you can't fault them for any of that. Their early converts used to go and create a little plantation, a little place for themselves to live that they could, buy and sell things. And then, they would just leaven the community with good works and mission. And they would actually, when people would want to convert to Moravian, they would tell them not to. And they would tell them to go convert to a different church because they wanted this leavening effect, this idea of, if you love us so much, don't just join us, go do it in your church, go do it in this church. So I don't think they do that anymore. Anyway, that's the Moravian Church, at least in a nutshell. So.
All right. Well, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's always fun to kind of dust off the history books and take a little trip down memory lane. Speaking of memory lane, we need to remind ourselves here, we are in Genesis 21 today. And in that, we need to remember that before Abraham decided to lie, to say it kindly, as we talked about last week, to Abimelech and his sojourning south before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, God came to Abraham and he said, in a year, your wife will conceive and bear a son. It's time for this long, long pregnancy we've been looking at for the last 4 months to come to an end. And it will. And so we begin with verse 1. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. I'm going to stop there. So, yes, Ken.
Sounds awfully like a immaculate conception, doesn't it?
I was going to say this certainly does sound very similar, right? Language
Yeah.
Mary.
Yeah.
With one key exception, right?
She's
Yeah.
not a virgin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And we don't have any language, because Mary asked that question, right? She says, hey, how is this going to be? I haven't known anybody. This, there's no funny business here. And the Lord says, Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you, and you will conceive. Here, you're absolutely right, Ken. The Lord is intimately involved in this, right? He is the one who closes and who opens wombs, just as we saw in chapter 19, as he did to the people of Abimelech's kingdom. Here, he does it to Sarah. He comes, he visits her, he opens her womb, just as he promised. So, and then she conceives. What a wonderful, wonderful thing. And they name him Isaac. I do love that we get Sarah's name here like 3 times, as if we were to forget. Right? God visits Sarah, Sarah conceives, Abraham has a new son born to him via Sarah. Like, there's no confusion here. But we are emphasizing it, right? That's the point, is that it's so important that it's from Sarah and it's by God's power that we repeat ourselves here. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, the other thing I noticed is going back to Mary, it doesn't say, the Bible doesn't say she bore Joseph a son.
Yes.
And here it says she bore Abraham a son. I mean, so
Mhm.
the Lord did as Sarah said, and she conceived and bore Abraham a son. You know,
Yep.
where it doesn't say that about Mary's. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It says she bore a son. She doesn't say she bore Joseph a son.
Yeah, that would be very confusing because then,
Right. But maybe that's where the whole, it wasn't God. I mean, it was God, but it wasn't God came in. Like Abraham really did have a hand in it.
yeah, yeah, no, I think the Lord visits Sarah, and we've seen this language of kind of visiting as kind of personally, being present, and he heals her. He heals her from this ailment of a closed womb. He may do that simply by a word. He may do that simply by a look. He might do that by, just his word coming as the Holy Spirit reminds her of this promise. And so then she and Abraham engage in said activities here. He could do it in any number of ways, but he is the one and the reason that this birth happens. And that's really the great importance of this, is that this ain't Sarah and Abraham's power making this baby happen. This is by the activity of God fulfilling his promise. And that's what we want to emphasize.
Does
Go
that
ahead.
go to John the Baptist? Sorry. Does that go back to John the Baptist too? Because so Portals of Prayer, we're going through Luke. And I do this in the morning with the kids before school. So we just went through Zechariah and John being born, and that was a whole type of situation where they were barren for a really long time.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Abraham and Sarah are the type, and John, or Zechariah and Elizabeth are a fulfillment of that type. They're the same thing. Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good connection there. Now everybody remembers what Isaac means, right?
Laughter.
That's right. That's right. God is laughing. Abraham is laughing. Sarah is laughing out of joy. Everybody gets to laugh, except for one person. We'll get to that in a minute.
Isaac.
You'll see that in a minute. So verse 4, and Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old. This is before the law of Moses is given, in which it commands circumcision at 8 days. But this ties in then that the law given to Israel in the desert of Sinai is the historic law, is the law given by God earlier, and God's people have been doing. It's just formalized there when they are at Mount Sinai. So circumcises them at 8 days, just as God commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. Right? This is not like being laughed at. That's like laughing with out of joy. Just so we're clear here on the strange idiom. And then 7, she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on that day when Isaac was weaned. All right. Anything here kind of standing out to us?
Just weird that it's mentioned that he was weaned. It's like, just
Well, come on, you don't celebrate that with a big feast? Kids are done. Hey, they're on
No,
their own now.
I didn't. Interesting.
But
It
also
is an interesting thing.
back then, and I don't know this for a fact, but I mean, wasn't weaning much later than it is now?
It could be. Yeah, it could be have been incorporated to like 3, 4. Yeah.
That's what yeah.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, 1, 2 years old, but it could be longer in that situation. So yeah, it puts Isaac somewhere in like the 2 to 5 range. we never get quite a real firm grasp on how old Isaac is until we do. Anything else kind of stick out here? Go ahead, Ken.
So it's interesting that they pointed out that he was old at 100 years old, because a lot of people are living to 100. So why is that so old?
So this is post-flood. And so post-flood, you don't have this kind of age typically. So Abraham will live to be 120.
Okay.
Moses will live to be 120. And those are your two big people, kind of your two old timers.
Okay.
Everybody else, as Moses will write in the Psalm that he writes, Psalm 90, 70 are the years of man, 80 if they have the strength. So post-flood, we have a drastic decline in the lifespan of the human race.
Yeah, for some reason I thought we were still in the couple 100-year-old time frame.
Well, that's probably because Abraham is still enduring with some of these early people that we talked with. If really Noah's son Seth is Melchizedek, then he would have dealt with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I can completely understand that, and the fact that when we are talking about these things that are so long ago, we start getting into some details and we end up compressing a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing that. Noah was testing me about another person named Abimelech the other day. I totally didn't remember this story, but it was one of those like, all right, I'll take your word for it. But it's, there's just so many details here. And when we get into the details, it can really be easy to not have kind of a clear, where are we anymore? Yeah, it happens to me all the time. Just hopefully not on Saturday morning or Sunday morning when I realize I've prepared a text we aren't on anymore. Only happened once or twice. So this weaning comment, we've talked about circumcision, so we're just kind of passing over that right now. But this weaning comment is very interesting to me. It's the only time in all of Scripture, right, that we have any celebration for the weaning of a child. I mean, like a big celebration. I mean, we hear once in a while, like when Samuel is weaned, when he's old enough to live on his own and not be attached to mom, Hannah, he goes to live in the temple. But there ain't no big celebration for that. But this is a big celebration. And some of the commentaries, they make all sorts of, comments about, well, maybe Abraham was just overjoyed and celebrated everything. Perhaps, you kind of just shoot it all when you've only got, one or two here. But there's a comment in the New Testament where Paul will say that we have to grow up as children, moving from milk to meat in terms of our spiritual growth. And I really think that is a connection. That's a callback from St. Paul to this story, to this celebration of weaning and this transition of age. And I think it's an important thing for us. For when we are young and we are beginning the faith, we need that spiritual milk to be taught those simple truths. Why is it such an impressive thing to see a baptism, to have the Lord's Supper, those things? And as we grow, we reach a point in our spiritual development where we need to search deeper. We need to chew on things, just as you guys do every Sunday night here. You guys chew on some really heavy stuff. And I think that's part of what's hidden here, in that Abraham here is celebrating that his son is able to is able to take some of those steps into that more spiritually mature faith that he has been brought up in. So here he's probably only a couple of years old. I mean, we're not, diving into the supreme truths of the universe or something like that, but I think it's there for us to celebrate, not just when young children grow, but that development of faith, and to seek that development of faith in our own selves, in our own souls, and in the souls of those who are around us. that we might celebrate this weaning from one and this enjoyment of another. Because, you know, I happen to be with Ken on this one, that steak is far superior to milk, at least now, in terms of taste. All right. Okay. Enough on that. Now we got to get into the business at hand. 8. And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great, but 9. That's where we are. 9, not 8. But Sarah saw that the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who she had borne to Abraham, was laughing. And so she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be the heir with my son Isaac. Just let's pause there. What do we
Wait,
think here?
I think that I'm confused.
Okay, go ahead, Theron. Let's unconfuse you.
Okay, so it says,
Yeah.
but Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Ishmael. Remember when Sarah couldn't conceive and she said, go lay with Hagar
Okay.
and she'll bore you a son, and they call him Ishmael?
Okay.
That's who she's talking about.
But it is confusing because Sarah is so mad, she won't even recognize this child's existence. She won't call him by name.
Right.
She
I
plays
was just
all the.
confused because I was just confused because I knew that Abraham's son was Isaac. And so when it says the son of Hagar is born to Abraham, I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
Do you not remember that one?
Well, and like you said, it doesn't name him, so it's
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah.
So
If it had said Ishmael, I would have
put 2 and 2 together.
I would have figured it out, but I just
Yeah, we would have had a big whale and we would have figured it out eventually.
They didn't get it.
That's okay. Someday Moby will be played for them and get that joke too.
Dick.
Well, he said there'll be a big
Oh,
whale.
call me Ishmael.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll fix
Yeah.
It
that.
only took a minute.
It's on the list. Leave me alone. I have like 8 different ones coming in at the library.
It's not on my list. I tried reading it once.
Okay.
So Sarah's obviously completely upset. Everybody gets to laugh at this party except for Ishmael.
Isaac.
Ishmael does not get to laugh. So this would lead us to a conclusion that Ishmael is probably not, we'll say, laughing with everyone. All right, that wonderful distinction of laughing with versus laughing at.
Mm-hmm.
He is laughing at this little boy, right? And I tend to agree. Luther looks at this and he says that he would understand Ishmael as laughing at Isaac, thinking that he is the heir. So that Ishmael is actually laughing at the promise of God here, right? I was the firstborn, he said. I will be the inheritor. You little kid, you think you're going to get something. You're not going to get anything, right? And perhaps even some of the helpers, the slaves, the men and women that had been freed or were following along with Abraham begin to believe this. You could have a big problem on your hands. But Sarah, hearing this, seeing this, won't have any of it. And so she tells Abraham to cast out the slave woman and her son. Oof.
Yee, cold.
It does feel cold. Absolutely. And certainly from the perspective of, we'll say, humanity, I would agree. But we'll look at this and we'll look at the next couple lines here. This becomes a question of, will I be faithful to God's promises, or will I be faithful to my own love for others? Right? What's more important, my love for God or my love for others? And sometimes that means we have to do things that might appear cruel, wrong, awful at first glance in order to be faithful to God. It doesn't happen that often, but I think it does in this case. So we go to verse 11. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham. Abraham's all on your side, by the way, guys. So Abraham is not agreeing with me on this yet. This thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. He loves Ishmael. It's bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. Right? But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And, verse 13, I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. Now, God had already made that promise to Ishmael, right? He was going to be the father of 12 princes. It's the last time we got that comment for Ishmael and of his birth. So God is reaffirming for Abraham that his promises will be given to him and given to his son, and then tells him to do as Sarah says. Why?
You get in less trouble that way.
Okay, you get in less trouble that way.
Happy wife, happy life, right?
Happy
Mhm.
wife, happy
Yeah.
life, sure.
Right. Right.
Kind of separate the families out too. It's like,
Yeah, and St. Paul again in the New Testament really helps us to see this clear, that Hagar and Sarah represent the two ways of life, the two ways of following God. There is the law and there is grace. There is the promise, right? And these are the two covenants that are available. You can either follow the covenant of the law, covenant of works, which is what Hagar is, because they didn't trust God's promises. They went and did their own thing, and Ishmael is the product of this. Or you can trust in the promise, the trust in the one, and that God will be faithful even when it seems he will not, that he will give grace even in the midst of every and all situations. And so you have to pick one of them. You can't live with both. You will only be able to follow one. And that's what Paul reminds us of in Galatians. And that's what the Lord helps Abraham see here. He needs to trust the Lord and to hold on to the promise, because it will come through Isaac. Let God take care of the other family, right? God isn't saying go kill this kid, right? Or take out his mom or anything like that. But you need to be faithful to the child who I said the promise will come to. This is one of those biblical stories where rock and fire are right next to her. Frying pan and fire are right next to each other. And it is in the midst of it. I could not imagine trying to figure out our way through it without getting burned or scalded. But in the end, this is what we do. When we are confronted with the choice of my love for another versus my love for God, we have to make a choice. And here Abraham helps us to see what that choice needs to be, even though it hurts, even though it feels awful, even though it means denying the love for one of our sons, in order that we might be faithful to God. This is what the Lord requires. So not the most pleasant story. In fact, it gets a little worse here. So let's look at what Abraham does here, unless anybody has anything to say for that little section. All right, verse 14. So Abraham rose early in the morning. He took bread and a skin of water. He gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her on her way.
very decisive.
Yeah. Yeah. And pretty skimpy. A loaf of bread and a canteen of water. That's it.
And God. Don't forget about that.
That's key. I think that's the whole key to this, Theron, because from the perspective of humanity, this is murder. Just so we're kind of clear, they're down near the Negev. The Negev is basically the entrance into the desert that lies to the south of Israel and to the west of Egypt. That little Sinai Peninsula is mostly desert. The Negev is basically the entrance point to that. All right, there is not a lot of stuff going on there. If you're lost out there in the wilderness and Abraham sends them with like a day, 2 days worth of water, crust of bread, I mean, not a whole lot, but you're right. He sends them out with the Lord's promise, trusting that God will take care of them. I'm sure Hagar doesn't believe him, but he is being faithful, and that's a good thing. So, she departed, wandering in the wilderness of Beersheba, and we'll get to what Beersheba means here a little later on. Verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Now, this is interesting that he gets called a child. Ishmael's about 13, 14 at this point.
I was going to ask that because she, to put a child under a bush, it makes it sound like they'd be smaller.
Yeah. So what it tells us is that he is so parched. He is so weak from lack of water that she had to carry him at this point and just has to put him underneath a bush because she can't watch him die. So he has no strength in himself anymore. And she went and she sat down opposite, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. Will God come through? Yeah. God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of the Lord called to Hagar. The voice of the boy who's crying out for water, who's crying out for mom, who's crying out, don't let me die. Right? And the angel of the Lord, here we go, called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? I love this. This seems like it's such an aloof comment, but it's not. Okay. What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. And then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. And she went and she filled the skin with water and she gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and he became an expert with the bow. And he lived in the wilderness of Panan, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And we just we'll stop there at 21 for a time. So who talks to Hagar?
An angel.
Particularly what? Which angel?
Us?
Angel.
Angel of the Lord.
What was that?
I said angel of the Lord. So
Yeah.
Jesus.
Which can be Jesus. Absolutely. Now, again, some commentators don't really want to see this as Jesus, but just a messenger of the Lord that appears from heaven. But I think it does certainly cause us to wonder, and I think there is some support in it, particularly at the end of 18, when he says, I will make him into a great nation. Not the Lord will make him into a great nation, but I will. Right? Taking on that role of God and fulfilling his promises. Unless somehow, and nowhere else in scripture do we see any of this, that God kind of gives one of the angels, all right, you got to go make this happen for this kid, kind of in control of his destiny. Like so many TV shows we've seen where an angel's in control of someone's destiny, trying to get them to do something. Something good happening, Trina?
A missed touchdown catch in the end zone.
No.
Yeah, too bad for the Buccaneers. Bummer.
Oh, darn.
He dropped it when he hit the ground, which can't.
Oh,
One of those.
it's like you get paid to play a game. You ought to catch those things.
So the eye is supposed to be.
Okay, let's returning now to the text here. So, this kind of nonchalant, what troubles you? Right? Because nothing should trouble us in the promises of the Lord, even when it seems like certain death. The Lord has promised to be with us. Even death is not a scary thing for those who fear the Lord. Right? For the Lord will be with us, just as he is with these people. And then we see that God does fulfill his promise. Now, it's very interesting to me. We've spent so much time and text on various parts of the story. The whole adulthood and rest of life of Ishmael is a verse and a half. We are long on detail in many things, but we are short on the tooth here. Why do you think that might be?
She said it doesn't matter for the story that we're focusing on right now.
Since
Exactly. Exactly. We don't care about Ishmael.
Yeah, Ishmael, get out of here.
The promise is not
they
to
gave
him.
they gave that much they gave as much information as they did because he knew some people were gonna be like, okay, but what happened to the kid? Did he just die out there or what? So he gave enough information to be like, yeah, no, he was fine. He made it. He moved them back to where we need to focus.
Exactly. Yep. It's good literature. It's also tracking with exactly what the promises of God are, right? He's not coming through Ishmael. All right, God took care of him, fulfilled his promise. Now let's go back to and track out the promise. Exactly right. And, you know, we all would love for, you know, these great backstories and wonderful other, you know, mini series we could all design in our heads for these things. But again, this whole text, as much as, you know, we talk about all the details and we tease out some of these meanings and things, the point of this is to get us to Christ. That's the point. And if it doesn't do that, then, you know, the Lord cuts those stories short so that we might focus on those things which truly matter. Okay. So on to 22.
Well, I got one quick
Go
question.
ahead. Yeah.
I can't remember. Ishmael turns into, I mean, what people?
Yeah. Good. Good question. He actually, there's going to be 12 princes that come from him. So a number of the Canaanites. Aram is one of the big people groups. We remember from Lot, we get the Midianites and now I'm skipping out on their names, but Ishmael is like I want to say the Amalekites, but that's not the right name for them.
Wasn't Moab, was it? No.
No, Moab is the other son from Lot. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Midian and Moab, I think, but they will be the southern peoples who will fight against Israel when they are trying to come into the promised land. That will be Ishmael's tribes.
Okay.
And we won't really see their battles here in this, but in Exodus you see a number of their interactions.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good question. All right, so at 22. Now at that time, we completely switch stories. At that time, Abimelech and Pekol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants or my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and the land where you have sojourned. So it's at this time, right, at the birth of his son, at 100 years old, that Abimelech makes a deal with Abraham. You don't lie to me anymore. You promise to be good to me, and we'll be good to you. Sounds like a square deal. And so Abraham says, I swear. And when Abraham, I swear, and this is really one moment of the story. Verse 25 really progresses us forward some bit in time, right? So kind of verse 22, 23 are almost background to verse 25 being the actual beginning of the story. So when Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing, and you did not tell me, and I've not heard about it until today. we need to know that there had been this promise between the two of them. Otherwise, this would seem, a non-related story. So it's interesting seeing how close Abimelech is to his servants, that he doesn't know what's going on here, but he seems not to. And it also seems that Abraham has made an accusation that maybe he can't back up, since he can't tell them who exactly had done it. Nevertheless, it serves as an opportunity. And so verse 27, so Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant, not just swearing that he would do something, but now a formal promise between the two parties. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you've set apart? And he said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me, that I dug this well. Therefore, the place is called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. And so they made a covenant at Beersheba. And when Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines, and then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And he sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. Lots of interesting stuff here. What sticks out to you guys? Because I've got all sorts of different things here.
What's the significance of the well?
Good. So the well that they see seems to be one of the wells that it deals with this covenant between Abimelech and Abraham. So the well that saves Hagar is one of these wells. There's an interesting thing in language that sometimes words can mean multiple things, even without really changing any of the vocables in the word. Like the word cool can mean cold to the touch, right? Or something that's hip. The word Seba can mean the number 7. It can also be used as a word to mean oath. So bear in Hebrew is wells. So it can either mean 7 wells or wells of the oath. And historically, you can actually go visit Beersheba, and there are 2 main wells and 5 kind of smaller wells still operational to this day in this area. So there are 7 historical wells that exist here. I share that with you because that's why you have 7 lambs. It's not just a number of completeness. It's 1 lamb for each of the 7 wells in the area. Abraham is laying claim to all of them, saying he did them all. And Abimelech says, okay, fine. Now, certainly there is a spiritual significance to this, right? These 7 ewe lambs, certainly Christ is the great Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, right? And in a desert place, what gives life but water? And so here we have the fullness of wells purified by the fullness of lambs, giving life in a place that is dead, even to those who were not initially part of God's people, an Egyptian and their son, who are made part of God's people by God's care and God's promises. I mean, that's a wonderful image here in this text as well. But yeah, that's the deal with the well and the oath. It's a little play on words, Beersheba, in terms of the oath and the 7. Anything else here?
I'm back.
Well, is it good that he is making a covenant with the Philistines?
Yeah, see, that I could not find much evidence on where this covenant goes. Right? I don't see anything in which the prophets look back and say, "O Philistines who made a covenant with Abraham, you have transgressed this," or things of that nature. So when God makes a covenant, it's a very one-sided, normally salvific kind of covenant. I will be your God, you will be my people. This covenant is very much a business orientation, right? Two equal parties who say, you do this and I'll do this.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening here, basically, with this two men making a covenant over these wells. That, okay, they are in the land of the Philistines, but Abraham dug them, so they are Abraham's possession, and that's what this covenant is symbolizing. Historically, as well, Beersheba, excuse me, is the southernmost place of the land of Israel. So this is one of the places where we kind of see a historic moment where Israel begins to be shaped in the landscape. This will be the absolute furthest south Israel will be given in when God designates the promised land. So this covenant does serve a purpose insofar as it gives Israel a physical claim to this southern space. And Abimelech has given that away.
Well, and I wondered the same thing when he said a couple of verses up, when he says he swears to Abimelech, because aren't we told not to do that? So
We are told to let our yes be yes and our no be no, and not to offer useless gestures like that. Yeah. So again, I didn't find and couldn't track a good answer for you on that. I was looking into this, trying to figure out why is he acting this way? Because they're the Philistines, for goodness sake. They're going to have Goliath and, gouge out Samson's eyes and all sorts of awful things. Why would, this covenant or this swearing certainly is going to be broken almost immediately by Israel. But I couldn't find anything. No one really took it up, but it's something that perhaps is worth seizing on a little bit longer. I may have to chew on it a little bit, get the flavor out of it. Go ahead, Rob.
Is there any significance to the kind of tree that he planted, or was that the kind of tree that they have out there?
That's a great question, Rob. And I did spend some time trying to figure out just what on earth this tree is. Now, some people would call it a salt cedar. It is a tree. It's an old world shrub, small tree that actually can grow in the Middle East to very large dimensions. But the most important thing about this tree is that it is a slow growing tree. There's a little proverb that is used in the Middle East in reference to this tree, and that is that one plants a tamarisk tree for his grandchildren. Because if you plant it, you won't see its shade. Your children probably won't see its shade, but your grandchildren will. And that would be the significance, I think, is that this is supposed to be an altar or some kind of a memorial tree, a reference point for Abraham's son, for his offspring, for future generations, bearing witness to the wells, to God's faithfulness, to the name of the Lord that he calls upon, the Lord, the everlasting God. Right? It's not quite an eternal tree, but it's going to live a really long time. And so it stands as a testimony to the Lord and his promises, his faithfulness throughout all of these situations. There isn't a whole lot of reference for this tree in other passages of scripture. Saul will use it, King Saul, not this tree particularly, but a different tamarisk tree. He actually is buried underneath one of them. But there's really only two other references, both with King Saul, neither one terribly helpful in trying to tease this out.
Sure.
But good question. Anything else? It's always fun to see kind of where we go I'm just scrolling over my couple pages of notes here on the side just to see what's there and what's covered and things. So very interesting. You guys are always so thorough in your reading and your questions. It's fantastic. So is a delight. Okay. So we've reached the end of 21. Next week, we'll start up with 22. I suspect we'll be in 22 for probably a little while. Mostly because we got to deal with all of the connections that we'll see to Jesus in that passage. So, and we'll take our nice sweet time. We took long enough to get to the birth of Isaac. We can take a little bit of time to go through the sacrifice or near sacrifice of Isaac. So, but once we get through that, then we start cooking with gas again, and we will see just about chapter by chapter some turning of situations and time. We'll just keep rolling on.
Well, there's a lot of names in 22.
Yes, there are. We'll deal with those too.
There's a lot.
Oh, is the video for last week up? Because we missed it. we started playing cards and completely forgot all about Bible study.
That's just fine. Yes, it is actually.
Okay, cool. So we can go back and learn about 20.
Yep. You cannot revisit last week's psalm because I misread my playlist and I taught on a psalm that I taught on already, and only discovered this when I uploaded said psalm again. And I said, I don't need to have two of those up there. So, but yes, the other one is new and up.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Not a worry. Thank you. All righty then. Anything else?
Game's tied,
No.
right?
All right. I gotta go watch Tom Brady.
Time.
Fantastic. Then I got a little bit of time. Very good, everybody. You all have an absolutely blessed evening. We will see you soon. Take care.
All right, thank you.
Thank-
Bye. Night.